Hello and welcome to What the Hey. Thank you for joining me to learn the answer to a question that I received, and when I go to my notebook of knowledge, I see that the question is written down as what the hey is Comic Sans, and this question comes from VideoTube, so hello to you and thank you very much for the question. So to start things off right, in terms of a very basic answer to this question, I would say that Comic Sans is a very famous typeface that is known for being both casual as well as unserious. And the reason as to why I say that it's famous early on in this video is because there are both like hate groups, like anti-Comic Sans groups, and support groups for Comic Sans. But either way, in general, it's here to stay. So for this video, what I'm going to be doing is kind of splitting it up between the history section as well as its kind of like overall importance and what a lot of people know it for. But to actually get started with the history behind Comic Sans, the actual person who created it would be Vincent Conner. The typeface was essentially requested by Melinda Gates back in 1944 for a software product that you may or may not be familiar with called Microsoft Bob. And Microsoft Bob itself was a Microsoft-like software product, which is a lot of words, but essentially what it was used for was to teach people how to use computers. So Melinda Gates reached out to Vincent Conner and was like, can you make a typeface for like the information that we put on the screen that people can read to understand what to do, but make it like readable and kind of enjoyable to actually look at? And I was surprised when I heard this, but the amount of time that it took for the font to actually be created was only like 3 days. Which when you only have so many characters to like create a font for, I guess that's like more than enough time, but in general, for how famous the font is, that just sounds crazy. And although it only took about 3 days to create the font, they didn't actually put it into Microsoft Bob. It was more so used later down the line in like Macintosh about 1996. And Vincent himself did have quite a background in terms of like experience and knowledge with creating visuals and graphics because he had a bachelor's in fine arts and photography and a master's in type design, so he knew what he was doing. He also helped to develop Wingdings, like that other font, and he also helped to do Trebuchet, so this dude is quite well known for his fancy looking words. Now this is the part of the video where I'll actually explain why Comic Sans is the way that it is visually. Essentially, Vincent was heavily inspired by the way that comic books like Batman and Watchmen did the words in their comics. And the way in which he actually created the Comic Sans typeface was by using a cursor and a mouse, which sounds super simple, but when you look at it, you're like, yeah, I can see how he did that. But it is really funny because Comic Sans as a typeface is supposed to look like irregular and flawed. Like essentially the main purpose as to why it looks the way it does is because Vincent wanted it to look unique and stand out. Which when going into my general opinion, like I mentioned earlier, there are actual like hate and anti-Comic Sans groups because they don't like the way that Comic Sans looks so silly and like non-uniform, like it doesn't look serious, so they don't really like it. Which the whole situation with there being anti-Comic Sans groups, bills, and movements is funny because Vincent himself thinks it's funny. Like the general fact that people are upset about Comic Sans as a typeface is funny because it's so well known, it's printed and used on so many different things, and the fact that people are angry about it is just funny because they can't really do much about it. And it is kind of weird that there are people who dislike it despite the fact that it may or may not be visually pleasing. It does apparently help people who may have like dyslexia to actually read. Like the fact that the words seem more legible helps certain people to read. So why would you be angry about that? There was a newer version that someone made of Comic Sans back in 2011, but there doesn't really seem to be too much of a difference to it, and honestly, the original version is the best. The only personal connection that I have to Comic Sans would obviously be Sans from Undertale. Like, I was trying to find some research on that too, and I think the reason why Toby Fox chose Comic Sans as Sans's text in the game is because Sans as a character is like silly and goofy, and then Comic Sans is usually seen as silly and goofy, so it makes sense. I guess except for the fact that like you can fight Sans and then that's not silly and goofy, but for the most part it makes sense. In general, whenever I see someone use Comic Sans for something, I just think it looks like a happy, fun font, so I don't really care. Of course, there's the whole thing about like certain serious things not needing the font of Comic Sans because it doesn't look super serious, but it really depends on the context, I guess. In the past, I've never really used Comic Sans for any type of document, schoolwork, really anything, so I haven't used it that much personally, but if I had to pick a font, like a typeface, I'd say Comic Sans is a pretty good one. Like, honestly, whenever I die, whoever does like the pamphlets or whatever for like my memorial, do it in Comic Sans because that's funny. But that's essentially the answer to the question, and I always put the links to the research and websites that I found to like do this entire video, and I'll also have a few links to videos you can watch that have different details and stuff about Comic Sans, so if you want to do some research and looking and educating on your own time, you totally can. But that is it, so thank you very much for watching. Bye.